We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. It is the Friday weekend edition. We are broadcasting live from WPEO in Peoria, Illinois. Why are we here? Well, there is going to be a very significant celebration for WPEO, 55 years of broadcasting. And so I'll be speaking at the banquet tomorrow night. There'll be other events around that as well. And there's all sorts of opportunities for us, if you are in the central Illinois area, to meet up with you. So I hope I see some of you tomorrow night at the banquet. Looking forward to a future one we're doing at KYCC. We'll talk about that somewhat in the future. But let's, if we can, on our Friday weekend edition, talk about a lot of different issues. We'll get an update for just a few minutes from Kelly Shackelford, President and CEO and Chief Counsel of Liberty Institute. We're going to talk about Anchor Stone Church and a variety of others. Dr. Merrill Matthews with us, of course, resident scholar of the Institute for Policy Innovation. We've got a very good set of articles, one for Karl Rove, one by Stephen Moore, and, of course, one by Merrill Matthews. A little bit later, we'll get into, of course, what's happening with China, maybe even retirement and a funding gap, even Penna-Dexter's commentary by the end of the day on defunding public broadcasting, to mention just a few. And for those of you who like to take an action, we have a new action item up today to contact Congress about the dismantling of DEI, and so we'll get into that a little bit later. But first of all, Kelly, let me come to you, because one of the first articles we have posted here talks about how a federal judge wants to stop discriminatory action against this Chinese and Taiwanese church, which is Anchor Stone Church. Can you tell us some more?
Yeah, this is a case we have right outside of Santa Ana, California. These are Taiwanese Christians, people who came from Taiwan, and they actually had put in originally and started and just had a prayer, a time in somebody's home, and that has grown and grown, and now it's in a church, and the church is thriving, and they put in to buy and to do a building. They talked to the city, and everything seemed fine. And as soon as they purchased the property and really wanted to be a church, the city decided they didn't want them to do that. They had a zone where basically churches were not allowed. And the problem with this is it's against the law. You can't have a zone where you have restaurants and museums and all kinds of things. Because, their only argument was, well, there might be traffic or noise. Well, of course, there's never traffic or noise around a restaurant or museum or all these other establishments. So, but they wouldn't back down. I mean, that's the amazing thing. So we had to go into federal court, and two pieces of good news. Kerby. Number one, the Justice Department joined us, saying this is a violation of religious freedom. And then number two, good news, the federal judge followed the law and issued an opinion in favor of this church. And so this discrimination hopefully is going to stop unless they want to appeal and create even higher level precedent for every other church around the country.
Might just mention that article is the first one there. And Dr. Merrill Matthews, you think about the number of stories you and I have covered over the years, and so many of those have to do with the fact that we have one set of laws and rules and regulations and zoning requirements for certain businesses, and it seems like we have a separate set for churches.
Yes, and of course, First Liberty's been doing some of these things. The group in Ohio, isn't Ohio the pastor who allows people to come in? They're in downtown. There's restaurants and other things around there, but they want to stop them from being able to do that. And it seems like some of these are just selective, Kerby. We didn't know it was going to be an issue until the church started doing it, and then all of a sudden, some municipality or state is pushing back.
Kelly, anything else we can talk about in terms of that? Because I know people always want to know more about these issues. And as we've mentioned before, when they go to your website, they can click on a picture, and if they go to the very bottom of your picture there, they'll see a thing that says FLI Insider. And so if people haven't signed up, that's a way in which they can find out about some of these victories.
Yeah, we have over 500,000 people who subscribe to that. It's free, but it's a way to keep up with what's going on, these big decisions that come out really every week. And I would just say this, Kerby, in addition to, go to firstliberty.org or enter my picture and go down to that Insider where you can get that email every Friday. I just want people to know that there are federal laws. There's a law that was passed particularly to protect churches. There are a lot of cities, a lot of government entities that decide, you know what, those churches they're nonprofit and they don't pay taxes. So maybe we'll treat them differently. And so there's a discrimination that has almost always gone on in this country, but it's against the law. This is a federal law. It's called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. It was a combination of protecting churches and prisoners of faith to be able to live their faith in prison, and that's obviously important if we're going to have people's lives change.
And Kelly, you mentioned that the Justice Department has sided with you on this, which raised the question to me, have you ever had the Justice Department side with you on previous cases?
We have a lot, but
the previous 4 years.
Yeah, the previous 4 years is a little less, but they did join us on some cases. We have some Jewish synagogue cases that are pretty darn extreme. The discrimination going on against them, but certainly these church cases. I just encourage people, if you're a church, and it's most churches, if they're not big, and mostly if they're starting out or looking for land or whatever. Don't have the ability to fight these big fights, and they just think, well, we'll just have to go somewhere else. And I just encourage you to know, number one, that the law is on your side, but federal law in addition to the Constitution. And number two, you can always call us at First Liberty, and we're happy to talk to you about the situation. But this is not only a victory for Anchor Church, but this is an opinion, a published opinion. So this will help all churches in these situations. And it's pretty simple. You can't just tell churches that they can't exist in certain parts of the city when you allow other uses that are very similar. And the way the law reads is you certainly can't treat them differently from similar uses in that area. And so, I've seen some cities where literally there's not a single place a church can exist as a matter of right anywhere in the city. And wow. So it's, and then they just decide they'll just do what they want to do. You'll ask for some special permit. Well, again, just know as a church, this country values our churches and our houses of worship. And so there is federal law that particularly protects you. And this is a good victory for this Taiwanese church who's looking to reach out to others who are coming from Taiwan and bringing them to the Lord. So good victory and a good precedent for all the other churches around the country.
Well, let's take a break. And again, I'm broadcasting today from Peoria, Illinois. And as you probably have figured out by now, we have Dr. Merrill Matthews and certainly Kelly Shackelford in studio. When we come back, I just want to get a quick update on a story some people have been asking about, this evangelical pastor, Gabriel Olivier, and his ability to preach the gospel. I thought we did believe in free speech and religious liberty, but nevertheless, we'll find that out. And then we'll get into the question a lot of people are asking me, even as I've been traveling, and that is, what about these tariffs? What do you think about that? We'll give you lots of perspective on that, but we need to take a break. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Corporate wokeness may be fading, and one illustration of that can be found in the change in corporate policies at one of the largest corporations in the world. Lathan Watts, Vice President of Alliance Defending Freedom, was on my radio program to talk about his article, Will Walmart Be a Leader in Abandoning Corporate Wokeness? Recently, Robbie Starbuck and the Rollback DEI campaign announced that Walmart distanced itself from its diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Latham Watts reported that investment advisors, corporate engagement consultants, and investors who manage billions in assets and millions in Walmart stock recently sent a letter of encouragement to Walmart. Also joining as signatories to the investors' letter were members of the State Financial Officers Foundation, a coalition of 38 financial officers from 28 states. The letter offered support for Walmart's decision, but also pointed to the fact that DEI has the opposite effect of its stated goals. DEI policies introduce serious legal, operational, and reputational risks to companies. In previous commentaries, I've documented numerous studies that illustrate the failure of DEI policies and the problems they often present to a company. In the letter, the investors and state financial officers also pointed to the most recent executive orders from President Donald Trump aimed at removing discriminatory DEI practices from the federal government and private companies. Walmart executives probably also learned from the cautionary tales of brands like Bud Light, Disney, and Target. Consumers want companies to provide quality goods and services and stay out of the culture wars. Walmart made the right decision. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, broadcasting live from WPEO in Peoria, Illinois. Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford in studio. Going to get to tariffs in just a minute, but Kelly, I thought because a lot of people do subscribe to your newsletter, you had a Liberty Flash news about this individual who has been using the opportunity, supposedly we have free speech, to preach on public sidewalks, but then was cited for that in, of all places, Mississippi. But I wanted to bring it up one more time, one, because he has not been able to be vindicated, but second, because this case might have to go to the Supreme Court because of a kind of strange ruling from the Supreme Court years ago, which seems to imply and really actually argue that if you admit your guilt, then you can't challenge the case. And that makes no sense to anybody that is not maybe familiar with some of those legal precedents. Can you explain that?
Yeah. Gabe Olivier is a guy who just loves to share about Jesus. And, you would think, because it's kind of been law for a long time, that the ability to engage in free speech in a public park would kind of be protected by the First Amendment. But not in this town. They didn't like the fact that he was sharing. And so what they did is they literally passed a law to make it illegal for him to talk about his faith in the park. They created a little zone out away from everybody where he could stand there if he wanted to. I'm sure that's what the founders want is you can you have free speech as long as you do it in this one little zone, off where no human beings are. So he went outside of that zone and they cited him. And so, he would have liked to have challenged the law constitutionally there, but you can't challenge the law while you're in a criminal proceeding. So he said, okay, I'll do nolo contendory, which means I don't admit it or deny it. I'm just saying I'm just going to pay the fine so I can get to the issue of whether I can come in the future without being criminally prosecuted. And so the government says, well, okay, there's this case that says that once you've been convicted and you're in jail, that you can't, while you're in jail, you can't challenge the constitutionality of the statute. And Gabe's kind of like, well, I'm not in jail. And so we went to the Federal Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit. And the way it works at the Federal Court of Appeals is you get 3 judges. But in very, very unusual circumstances, you can get what's called en banc, which is all the judges in that circuit all come together for one hearing. Well, that's what happened. We had 17 judges come to hear this. And, I mean, mind-bogglingly, 9-8, they said Gabe can't bring his lawsuit. And so you're like, okay, so Judge Ho wrote a dissent that was so good. He said, okay, so you can't bring the lawsuit if you don't pay the fine. You can't bring the lawsuit if you do pay the fine. So it's just the weirdest. So you've got an American citizen that's trying to share his faith in a public park. Number one, they've made it illegal. And then number two, they're not allowing to bring him a lawsuit at this point. So there's nothing you can do to protect your First Amendment rights. So it's a bizarre opinion. A lot of stuff that we all thought was kind of decided many, 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 many years ago, and yet we're having to tee it back up, and we just filed that at the U.S. Supreme Court. It's Gabe Olivier and is the name of the case, and you can get it if you want to look at the case or the briefs or anything, it's at firstliberty.org. But crazy case, and one that I pray the Supreme Court will take, because if they do, it will be a really important precedent for not only the right of people to share the gospel, but also just for basic First Amendment rights.
Kerby, speaking of public expressions of the gospel, lately we watched, my wife and I watched the local news, and basketball teams, girls basketball teams have been wrapping up, and oftentimes they're going to some of these star players at the end of it, and they come out with a very bold expression of faith there in front of the cameras, and it's a telling of the gospel in many cases about how we thank God for His appreciation for His help and so forth. It's just a very it's interesting that they use these microphones and cameras to be able to share the gospel with people in a very brief format, but it's public and it's coming from star athletes.
And again, I've been very impressed. We've had a couple of guests on Point of View talking about how they were watching what happened at Asbury College. They've watched at some of these revivals that have taken place on campus. Just even today, meeting with a young person and just getting very encouraged about the younger generation that maybe see this as an opportunity. And that, Kelly, that does bring us back, before we get to our action item for today, that there is an opportunity for people to restore faith in America. So even though you're fighting that case, you basically opened the door for a lot of different communities, municipalities, states, and others to actually reassert religious liberty, which we have not had in our lifetime.
Yeah, when we won all these Supreme Court cases in the last 3 years, a lot of people are used to the religious freedom restrictions that have been on them for about 50 years. Oh, you can't put up a nativity scene, and we got to roll the 10 Commandments in the closet, and all these different things. Well, most people have no idea all that stuff has been overturned in the last 3 years. So they're not aware of what they can do in our community. So we literally created a website called restoringfaithinamerica.org. So it's RFIA.org, to just give people things that they can do. And those who are like in our group, like we call them faith blazers, the people that are doing things in their community that want to get that information. We send something every month. Here's something you can do. For instance, right now, there's a lot of graduations coming up. Well, people in their graduation speeches, just like, Merrill was saying, they can say in their graduation speech something about their faith. They have every right to do so, and we lay all that out. And so we're trying to help people understand the things that they can do that maybe in the past they thought they couldn't because of some, wrong court decisions that are really now all been overturned. And so if you're watching around the country, if you're reading the news, you're noticing that there are all kinds of things now going through legislatures to make this clear to their people. 10 Commandments, like Kentucky just pulled their 10 Commandments monument back out and put it on the lawn. In school, a lot of these things are being brought back in. So there's chaplains programs being established. I mean, there's just so many. It's because of these victories, but it's really because people aren't aware of those victories, and so actions are being taken. So this is one of those great things where everybody always feels like you're on defense. Well, you can be on offense, right? You've already won. The law is on your side. So the question is, what does God want you to do in your community? And restoring faith in America is a way to look at some of those things. Like, let's make sure you put up a nativity scene at Christmas this year on the county or the city lawn or wherever you do that, because it's allowed now. And there's just a myriad of those types of choices, a way to bring faith back to America and for religious freedom and sort of these fears to be over.
Well, let me, just before I take a break, recognize that we do have a new take action item. So if you go to the website or even during the break, you'll see it where it says contact Congress about dismantling the DEI Act. There is a piece of legislation that has now been put forward called Dismantle DEI Act. And as we've said before, you have the executive orders from Donald Trump, but it's possible that an executive order brought under one president could be reversed by the next president. So this is an attempt to actually move forward with that. So this particular bill has been introduced by Congressman Michael Cloud and Senator Eric Schmidt, and so you can see the information about this. Now, we are using a slightly different format, so what you will need to do is fill out the information again. Some of you may already have that information on our system, but we're using a different system to get that out. And at the top, you'll notice that you don't have your representative listed, but don't worry about that. Once you've filled all that out and hit send, it will go to the right representative, and then that will be stored. But we have an opportunity then for you to express your opinion, and we give a suggested letter. It's got just a few paragraphs, and you can modify it any way you might want to do that. And then you can click on that button that says send. You can also print and mail it, or you can even preview it. So it gives you a number of different options. So it may look a little different than what you're used to before, but we have seen a tremendous amount of significant success in the relating to removing some of these DEI offices and other things. Matter of fact, my commentary today is all about how wokeness is kind of changing in the corporate world. And so if you'd like to know a little bit more, we give you some basic information about what the act would do. We also give you a couple of quotes, and then we give you a sample letter. So if you would want to do that, and I would think this would be something that we've talked about so often that you would want to do, go to pointofview.net. That middle section says Take Action. Click on the button that says Take Action, and then you will have succeeded in actually exercising your civic duty. We'll be back right after this.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kerby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Friday weekend edition, and Kelly Shackelford, Merrill Matthews with us in studio. I'm broadcasting live from WPEO in Peoria, Illinois. We're going to be a part of a banquet tomorrow night celebrating 55 years of WPEO. But let's get into tariffs. And first of all, we from time to time have tried to give you different perspectives. And for just a few minutes, let's look at some of the ones that have been more negative. One by Karl Rove, The Art of the 90-Day Tariff Pause. He refers to Donald Trump as Tariff Man, so you can kind of see where that might be taking you. And then Dr. Merrill Matthews, of course, you have written one, which I called Taxes, Tariffs, and Trump, but you said, remember when Republicans were tax cutters? No more. So, Merrill, help us out here, because you have certainly looked at this issue of tariffs, very concerned about that, and we do have a 90-day pause, but what do we need to think about in terms of what's unfolding right before our very eyes?
Yes, and when that came out, we didn't have the pause yet, but the what's been happening on the tariffs is that there is Peter Navarro, who's one of the chief advisors to the president, has been boasting that the tariffs will bring in $6 trillion over 10 years, or $600 billion a year. And there's other estimates out there. The Tax Foundation has a lower figure. But the point that people need to understand is tariffs are taxes. And there was a time when Republicans were tax cutters, and they're still trying to be tax cutters in the tax bill that they're working on now. But if you go with $6 trillion in new tariffs, you've in essence created new taxes on people. And the puzzling thing about this, Kerby, is that Donald Trump in his inaugural speech in January said he wanted to replace the Internal Revenue Service with the External Revenue Service. And he said, we want to stop taxing Americans, we want to start taxing foreign countries. But the tariffs are taxes on Americans, both industries and individuals. And I'm mystified by this discussion that he has there, because if you went with the tariffs, and Steve Moore in a piece you highlight is suggesting that we might go with tariffs and use that as a way to cut tax rates on Americans, but you're increasing taxes in one place and decreasing them in another. And it's amazing to me that the president keeps implying that these tariffs are taxes on foreign countries when we know they're taxes on Americans.
Kelly?
Yeah, the one thing I would say that's obviously different in this is taxes is like taxing every American, right? And they don't have a choice, right? I mean, if they have an income or if you're in a state, I guess you'd have a choice to buy something or not to buy something. Part of the reason for the tariffs, I know, is beyond taxes. I mean, I know they're saying he's going to raise taxes, but it's to actually there's no tax if it's produced in the United States, right? So part of what he's trying to do, obviously, is to bring manufacturing. I mean, bring plants, bring all these people to produce these things, to where Americans get these jobs and they're not sold overseas. So that's definitely a distinction. And so I don't know. You never can tell with Trump, because his art of the deal approach of sort of loading up all kinds of really scary things and then going somewhere in the middle and getting a much better deal than we had. Every time I hear him talk about replacing our tax structure with tariffs and all this, and I always think he's laying out the scare tactic, because we're going to end up hopefully with less tariffs, right, from other countries on our products coming into their country, and I certainly, on that point, it's obviously a little different in what he's trying to do. Now, it could be that the result of what he's trying to do is actually less tariffs, right, for everybody. I mean, no taxes, because we'll drop ours if you'll drop yours, and then now we've just got free trade, which would be great. And I think the thing that's becoming clear to those who aren't watching it as closely as like Merrill and many others around the world is that China is such a huge percentage, right, of the trade. I mean, I think if the United States and China are added together, it's maybe over half of of all in the world. And then China is going through these other countries to avoid tariffs, from what I understand.
To some extent, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that we're kind of in now, where we have now, it's kind of a China-United States kind of thing. And there you got additional issues. I haven't heard Merrill talk about this. I'm sure he has opinions on this, but I mean, I just think having China in the World Trade Organization was like a mistake, because they steal everybody's intellectual property, they violate all the rules, and you really can't have trade when people are doing things, when they're stealing your companies. And so maybe something good will come out of all of this. I don't know, but definitely there's a lot of bluster going on for sure.
There's a lot of bluster, but there are things that we don't produce. We don't produce bananas.
Right.
We don't produce coffee beans or cocoa beans, so you can't get chocolate. So had they been a little more targeted, it would have made a certain amount of sense. His reciprocal tariffs that he came out with, I think on Wednesday, you looked at that and you thought, well, I don't understand. This isn't reciprocal at all, in the sense that United Kingdom, right, England, and Australia, we have trade surpluses with those two countries. They actually buy more from us than we buy from them. So they only got hit with the 10% and not the bigger amount. But it's interesting the way this has developed. As of right now, as far as I know, it could change in a few minutes, but right now we've got 145% tariff on China. They have put 125% on us. There's a 10% across the board on every country, 25% on all cars and trucks and car parts coming into the U.S., and a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico, but it's exempted from things under the USCMA. So it begets a little bit, it's hard keeping track of it all. The hope is that with this 90-day postponement, we'll go through and we'll negotiate things.
Right.
Tariff agreements usually take a good while.
Yeah.
And I think the bigger problem Trump faces is, part of the rationale for doing this is he wants to bring industries back to the United States. But businesses are increasingly saying, well, we're not sure, given the uncertainty that's going on, if we start trying to come in, are something going to be hit with a tariff? Is somebody else going to hit us with a tariff? And then the other problem, and so it takes, if they're going to invest millions or hundreds of millions of dollars expanding, do you want to do that if there's going to be a change in Congress come in next year, or if you got a new president coming in 4 years that ultimately comes and removes all of this? So it is really a problem for business, and I think that's where the fears about recessions are coming up, that you're going to have businesses just saying, we're going to sit on our dollars right now because we don't know what's going to happen. So had it been a little more structured, might have made that work a little better, but the uncertainty that's out there is really, I think, created a lot of chaos among businesses who just don't know whether they can or can't invest.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the economy was like that right before the election. I think people weren't sure what the heck was going to happen, and I think there was a lot of uncertainty, and the money was being held. And here's my guess at what the political strategy is. I think the political strategy is that Trump is willing to sort of take all this medicine right now to try to see how he can improve America's stance with regard to all these trade agreements and everything. And then he knows he's going to take a hit with that in the market and other places. But then right after that, I think he figures by the time that's starting to work its way out or the deals are getting done, then I think he knows the tax cuts are going to hit. And so he thinks that by the time he gets to the midterms, he will have done the tough thing, taken the short-term hit, created better situations for trade in the future, and then lay the tax. I don't know if that's going to work, but I do. As I'm watching, it seems like that's kind of the political gamble that he's playing. Is there's this thing? Let's make it better now. Let's take our medicine right now before the election. Then we'll roll out the tax cuts. Then we'll have better, hopefully lowered tariffs with other countries. We'll be doing better. And things will sweep up by the midterms to have the economy, going in a good direction.
And if he fails at this, and this was Senator Tom Tillis's comment in the hearing the other day, was whose throat do I wring if all this fails? Yeah. Because it is the global trading system is very complex, interdependent, interrelated. I mean, listening to news last night, you had a company here in the Dallas area that makes air conditioners, and we get hundreds of parts from companies overseas. And if you just stop 2 or 3 of those parts from coming in, we can't make the air conditioners that we then take and install. So it's a big gamble, and I'm not sure it's working out as well as he hoped it would.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll get into a little bit more of the details there. You know, the Treasury Secretary said, well, most Americans with 401ks don't look at the day-to-day fluctuations, but in a stock market decline, sometimes they do. So we'll come back, and since we did talk about China, one of the other articles I did not mention is about boxing out China. So what does that mean there? We'll continue our conversation with Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford as we try to make some sense of the tariffs and the stock market. All that coming up right after this.
President Trump recently told reporters he would be honored to defund National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service. He said they are a waste of money. Both PBS and NPR have long exhibited a decidedly liberal political bias and, more recently, have advanced far-left positions on issues like gender ideology. Currently, PBS and NPR receive approximately $500 million per year in federal funding through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is a private, nonprofit organization authorized by Congress in 1967 when there were 3 network television choices. Today, there are hundreds of channels, plus, as Washington Post columnist George Will points out, 15,000 commercial radio stations, 425 U.S. satellite radio channels, and over 4 million registered podcasts worldwide. The heads of PBS and NPR testified at a recent House Oversight Committee hearing. PBS President Paula Kerger told the committee, "We bring a diversity of viewpoints." But CEO Catherine Marr conceded in her testimony that NPR botched coverage of Hunter Biden's infamous laptop. House members also pointed out that the network misinformed the public on COVID-19 origins and the Russian collusion hoax. According to Victoria Taft at PJ Media, 87 out of 87 editors at NPR are leftist Democrats. Why are we funding them? If we stopped, she writes, PBS stations won't be destitute. They fundraise through telethons and on-air messages. They receive funds from leftist organizations like the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has called for removing all taxpayer funding of both PBS and NPR. At the House hearing, she told their leaders, "We believe that you all can hate us on your own dime." Conservatives in Congress often advocate defunding these entities, but many legislators fear local pushback. If they can't summon the courage, DOJ can help them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us today, Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. And let's, for just a minute, put some numbers on the table. And then, Merrill, I want to come to you about, especially since Kelly talked about China, but for people to get some perspective, sometimes I encourage people to get something to write with. Americans make up about 4% of the world's population. here's another way to look at it, because that was Karl Rove saying, that means that 96% of our potential customers live somewhere else. So to think about 4% versus 96%. But getting back to what Kelly mentioned just a minute ago, if you look at our gross domestic product, using the IMF numbers, we represent 27% of the world's total global economy, which is very significant. But it still means that a very sizable amount, 73% of it, is up in some other place. So those are some numbers to think about, but it brings us back to this issue of China. A lot of people have said, was there an attempt to block every conceivable route that Chinese goods would be used to get to us? Because we talked about Great Britain, the United Kingdom, and things like that. But why would you have a tariff on Vietnam unless you were afraid that China was going to try to use Vietnam to get goods to us? And that gets to a bigger issue, because whether we talk about some of the interviews we've done with Gordon Chang, the material we did the other day from Senator Tom Cotton about China. China is our enemy, and China, as Kelly pointed out just a minute ago, Merrill, is certainly not a friend of the United States.
No, and of course they will look for various ways to outsource those to other countries. But other U.S. companies have, for the past 4, 5, 6 years, have been starting to take some of their business out of China, wisely, I think, because of the tensions that are rising, and moving it to Vietnam, India, Malaysia, Indonesia, other places where they get cheap labor, essentially. And Nike, I think, does most of theirs in Vietnam. In fact, Nike, when the president, there was a rumor that the president was going to put a 90-day halt on those. The first rumor before it actually happened, Nike stock went up because they said, that means Vietnam's not going to be hit by this. But China's also pretty good at being able to put subsidiary companies out there that look like they're not necessarily Chinese connected, but they are Chinese connected. And Kelly's point is exactly right. For decades, China has been taking, they have an issue where they both steal intellectual property and what we call tech transfer. So they would say to a company, you're welcome to come and set up a business here in China, but you have to partner with one of our companies, and you have to share all your intellectual property and other things with that. And then after a little while, once that Chinese company got going, they would say, I think we're having a disagreement, so we're going to sever our relationship. Went on for decades. Back in the mid-2000s, that was going on. So it has been a problem with China for a little while. Kelly talked about them coming into the World Trade Organization, early 90s. That was actually absolutely a problem because China is, back then you were still hanging over. There's still a hangover from Deng Xiaoping, who tried to bring more market access into China. And there was a hope that China would become a little more free market, maybe move towards a greater freedom. President Xi comes in 2012 and actually goes the opposite direction. So it has created a real problem for them. So many of the Chinese companies are what we call state-owned enterprises, and China plays a major role in there. And then since China is largely directed by by their state government, by Xi, they oftentimes, as central governments do, overproduce in some things and underproduce in other things. And steel is one thing they overproduce on, so then they try to put it on the market, lower the price significantly, undercut other countries, and then you have that ends up hurting the countries that have their own steel production. So it's a real problem with China, and you would expect with these tariffs coming in that they would look for various ways to try to sidestep these, and we'll see how that works, but I'm sure they'll try to do that.
What I keep hearing, I don't know if, Kerby and Merrill, you both might know the answer to this, but what I keep hearing is that China is more dependent upon us than us on them, and that they're actually at a time where they're actually struggling, and their population numbers are going the wrong way, and that they're going to have to come to the table and work something out with the United States. Do you think that's true?
I'm not sure, because Xi isn't up for election. And so when you're not up for election, you can do pretty much whatever you want to. And it is true that they're more dependent upon us. And for this reason, even though China is the second largest economy in the world, when you do this on per person income, because they've got over 1 billion people, it's actually, they're not a very rich economy when you look at individual income. And so we have a lot more money, and as a result, we can buy more from them than they can buy from us. us, and so we have a trade deficit with them. Now there is another side to this, Kerby, which is that's called the current account. There's the capital account where they then take that money and then reinvest it. They've been buying our treasuries. They've been buying our debt. They're the second largest holder, if I remember right. Japan is the largest holder of our debt. One of the things that Trump hit this week was when the stock market goes down, typically the bond market does better as people flee the stock market and go buy bonds. You actually had the opposite happening this time, people fleeing the stock market, people fleeing bonds. And when U.S. Treasuries had to start offering higher interest rates to try to attract people there because we've got so much debt that people have to buy, our countries have to buy. And that's what apparently spooked Trump, is that he doesn't, he doesn't want us having to pay more interest on treasuries because that comes out of taxpayers' dollars. And so that seems to be what caused him to actually make the change here. But it's a very complicated system, and it's not going to work with just easy solutions, especially when we need other countries bringing those dollars back to buy our debt right now.
Yeah, that Treasury auction is one that's caused a lot of concern because, as we pointed out before, $9 trillion worth of treasuries and bonds and all of that. But just before I take a break, to make Kelly's point, one of our articles is entitled Boxing Out China. That was an opinion piece that appeared in Newsweek, and it refers back to an opinion piece by Gordon Chang, who's been in studio with us by phone. Mm-hmm. And in his piece, he said Trump holds all the high cards. Xi, that is the head of course, China, is in short place the fate of the Chinese economy in the hands of the leader of that irreplaceable export market, the American one. And he added that there are winners in trade wars. In this particular one, the winner will not be China. So even Gordon Chang saying that sooner or later, probably sooner, something's going to happen in China. And of course, as Kelly also alluded to, they are in a very difficult situation right now, in a weakened position. You can decide whether you want to call it a recession or a depression in China. They need the United States more than the United States needs them. But of course, as Dr. Matthews just pointed out, we still need all those parts and all those things to keep things flowing. So we'll see how this unfolds. But let me just, before we take a break and when we come back, Dr. Merrill Matthews has a very good idea about a funding gap and a couple of other great articles that we can get talking about in a minute. But I did want to remind you that we do have a take action item. Go to the website, pointofview.net. There you can find the articles by Dr. Merrill Matthews. You can find the link to First Liberty Institute. But that middle section there says contact Congress about the Dismantle DEI Act. And this is something that has been introduced, and it's an opportunity for you to contact your member of Congress. The Dismantle DEI Act defines and prohibits DEI practices, ensures that all DEI offices will be terminated, bars federal funds used for DEI training, and a variety of other issues. We give you some quotes. We give you a sample letter that you can write. If this is the first time that you've come to this, you will need to fill out that information. Even if you have in the past, since we're using a new system, you may have to fill it out again, and then you can either preview it, you can send it by email, or you can even print it out and mail it. And so we've made it very easy for you to contact your member of Congress about this Dismantle DEI Act. So let me encourage you, even at the break, to go to the website, pointofview.net. We'll come back with a lot more material in the second hour, right after these important messages.
It was not that long ago that censorship appeared to be almost inevitable. Free speech was being attacked and strangled in many places. And some of us wondered if this was the end. But now, many feel a new sense of hope, a chance for a fresh dawn. Let me caution you, now is not the time to relax. It's a time to press forward, to use this fresh opportunity to proclaim and learn how to apply truth to current issues. By the fact you're here, listening right now, that tells me that you recognize the vital role Point of View plays as a voice of truth. For more than 50 years, we've informed and equipped people who have made a real difference. And when you give to Point of View today, you breathe life into what can be a new golden era for the truth. Please, take a moment right now and invest in truth. visit pointofview.net or give it 1-800-347-5151. That's pointofview.net. Click in now or call 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today as we broadcast from WPEO in Peoria, Illinois. And then, of course, we also have in studio with us Dr. Merrill Matthews and Kelly Shackelford. If you look at the calendar, you recognize it's April 11th, although some of you may be hearing this program later, as we sometimes make it available during the weekend. But for those of you listening live right now, you're 4 days away from April 15th, the day we pay our taxes. Now, the bottom line is that's not when we pay our taxes. Most of us have had our money and taxes taken out, withheld from paychecks. Tax day is when we file the 280 million tax returns to see if we get any money back. But I thought we'd spend some time talking about taxes and tax cuts. But certainly, as we get into this issue of tax cuts, we have to recognize that for some of you, it's going to be a long weekend if you haven't filed your taxes. For some of us, we then find ourselves, as I've said before, at the mercy of bookkeepers and accountants who have become the experts in the Byzantine tax code that runs more than 6,800 pages and takes billions of hours to apply. So, Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you first. We have this piece that was in the Wall Street Journal, and you and I talked about it before it came out, so now it's out, so people can find it on the website or they can go to the Wall Street Journal, because right now, we just talked about this idea of tax cuts, and we talked about taxes and tariffs and everything else. If indeed we do want to extend the tax cuts under Donald Trump, 2017, how can we extend the tax cuts and not end up with a federal deficit, since we're almost running $2 trillion annual deficits? And you have an idea. I'd like to hear it.
And that's one of the reasons why they've had so much trouble getting it through the Senate, and especially through the House, which they were able to get through yesterday, I believe. And so the question was, how are we going to find some spending cuts? How are we going to find some increase? They want to be able to reduce the federal deficit that was $1.9 trillion last year under Joe Biden, and they'd like to be able to say we've made some progress on that, because we're looking at about $36 trillion in federal debt. So what the idea came when I was listening to the radio a few weeks ago, and heard them talking about the 2017 tax cuts. And I mentioned to my wife at the time, I said, one of the things about the 2017 tax cut provision is it allowed for repatriation of funds. A lot of multinational companies had businesses overseas in other countries. They make sales there. They get money, revenue. They pay the income tax in that country. But when they brought it back, they had to pay the difference between what the income tax, the corporate income tax was in that country, and what it is in the United States. And the United States at that time had the highest corporate income tax, and so most of them left that money overseas. And there was roughly $2.6 trillion as estimated. And the 2017 tax bill allowed them to bring that money back, pay a flat tax on that, and then repatriate it back to the United States. So companies brought hundreds of billions of dollars back to the U.S. because they had the chance to do just a low flat tax on that. And so I think my wife mentioned, I wish we could do something like that. And I said, well, maybe we can, because we have $15 trillion in IRAs in the U.S., $15 trillion. Another $26 trillion is in 401ks. And so the idea was, if the government needs additional money now to try to lower this gap so that we don't have quite the deficit, perhaps the thing to do is to allow us to take a portion of that IRA money, 401k money out, pay a small flat tax on it, and then we get the money to be able to use however we want to, and the federal government gets additional income. And the purpose of the IRA initially, Kerby, was the idea that when you're working, you're in a higher tax bracket. When you retire, you're in a lower tax bracket, so you'd be paying lower taxes on that money. So you avoid the taxes when you earn the money and put it in the IRA, and then you pay a lower tax rate. Turns out that's not necessarily the case for a lot of people, because if they have a pension, Social Security is actually taxed. The president wants to take that away. I want to take that tax off the Social Security income. But many of us are not necessarily. People continue to work and have other income coming in, so we're not necessarily in a lower tax break. So the idea was, if you're in the top, there's 7 individual tax breaks. If you're in the top 5 of them or so, you might see this as a real chance to bring money back, pay a lower flat tax rate on it, get the money out of the IRA. You can now use it to buy a home or whatever you want to do, and the government has additional income coming in to help shore up the revenue shortfall that we have right now.
Kelly?
Well, I think that one of the things that's not talked about a lot, but what would happen if we didn't extend the tax cuts that we have right now?
Yeah.
Oh, good line.
I mean,
it'd be a huge tax increase.
Yes, and so anyway, I think it's a massive situation they know they have to do, and then they know that Trump's wanting these other things on top of it.
Yes.
No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security,
no tax on overtime.
No tax on overtime. I mean, these are very popular, and so it's a lot. And so what I find interesting is you would think of all times that in this tax situation, and just the bill that the House got through the resolution last night and will go over to the Senate, you would think if there's any time you could cut some things in what Congress is spending, it would be right now. Number one, DOGE is highlighting all kinds of things that, DOGE is just cutting for now. They're not in the budgets, right? So you could just pick your favorite ones and put them in the budget and cut those, right? Additionally, you've got all the money that was still being spent from the Biden administration on COVID, all these bills. We could just take that off, right? And so before you even get started, it seems to me that you could cut some things, and yet we had a lot of the Freedom Caucus that was really upset, and they ended up having to go on promises from the speaker and the president that we'll get to those other cuts later, and we know how that usually works. So it's amazing how difficult it is, even with, everything that's going on right now to encourage cutting, that is still so hard for Congress to cut. One
of the things some of the Republicans would like to do is to cut Medicaid, and there's several ways you can do that, just because we know there's so much fraud in Medicaid and others. Yep. But many of the states that are red states that have Medicaid as a major health insurance program for them people, so some of those Republicans are pushing back on it. So you get tensions from both parties on that, because once a subsidy or an entitlement program is out there, it is really hard to scale that back.
Certainly is. We need to take a break, and when we come back, I want to continue that, because I thought I might tell you when Tax Freedom Day is and the Cost of Government Day and a few things like that, because some of you might just be thinking, well, we just maybe shouldn't extend the tax cuts that existed in 2017, and thus we could increase taxes. We would pay off the national debt. No, we won't, and we want to try to provide a little bit of perspective to that as well. Then we'll get into some other issues, but we are talking about something, of course, that affects all of us, because I suspect most of you listening to Point of View are indeed paying taxes, and you probably have a tax bill that you're working on right now, or maybe you've already taken care of. But what about the future of this country, especially for our children and grandchildren? We'll come back and talk about that right after these important messages.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Corporate wokeness may be fading, and one illustration of that can be found in the change in corporate policies at one of the largest corporations in the world. Lathan Watts, Vice President of Alliance Defending Freedom, was on my radio program to talk about his article, Will Walmart Be a Leader in Abandoning Corporate Wokeness? Recently, Robbie Starbuck and the Rollback DEI campaign announced that Walmart distanced itself from its diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Lathan Watts reported that investment advisors, corporate engagement consultants, and investors who manage billions in assets and millions in Walmart stock recently sent a letter of encouragement to Walmart. Also joining as signatories to the investors' letter were members of the State Financial Officers Foundation, a coalition of 38 financial officers from 28 states. The letter offered support for Walmart's decision, but also pointed to the fact that DEI has the opposite effect of its stated goals. DEI policies introduce serious legal, operational, and reputational risks to companies. In previous commentaries, I've documented numerous studies that illustrate the failure of DEI policies and the problems they often present to a company. In the letter, the investors and state financial officers also pointed to the most recent executive orders from President Donald Trump aimed at removing discriminatory DEI practices from the federal government and private companies. Walmart executives probably also learned from the cautionary tales of brands like Bud Light, Disney, and Target. Consumers want companies to provide quality goods and services and stay out of the culture wars. Walmart made the right decision. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free booklet on a biblical view on chemical abortion, go to viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. Viewpoints.info/chemical-abortion. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we were, of course, talking about this very good piece, which we have posted for you to read from the Wall Street Journal by Merrill Matthews, a retirement account fix for the funding gap, taking this idea of what happened in 2017, the repatriation of U.S. multinational funds that were in overseas bank accounts and brought back to the United States at a set amount. If you were to set it for maybe 10% for the $15 trillion of dollars sitting right now in IRAs, and these would be individual retirement accounts, that would be an opportunity. So again, if this is something that gets proposed in the next couple of weeks, you heard it first here on Point of View from Merrill Matthews. But I'd like to go back to both of you for just a minute, since we were looking at the fact that we have tax day coming up on Tuesday, and that's when our taxes are due. Merrill Matthews, you and I have talked about before that they have put together what's called Tax Freedom Day. Mm-hmm. And they have picked this year as Tax Freedom Day, April 12th. Now, how do we do this? Well, you take, for example, the amount of all income earned in each year, and you divide that into, of course, the tally of taxes. So you can figure out when, in a sense, you've stopped paying your taxes and you're now paying yourself. And so Tax Freedom Day is April 12th, which is tomorrow. But interestingly enough, that varies because citizens listening to us today in Louisiana, they've already had their tax freedom day. Citizens say in New York, they still have to wait almost to the middle of May, which shows you a little bit of the tax burden. But talk about that for just a minute, because when they start getting these numbers and saying Americans will pay more taxes than they spend on food, clothing, and housing, I saw a number that say maybe that's more taxes they pay in food, education, and health care. We, I think, don't realize how much we pay in taxes because, as I mentioned just a minute ago, it's withheld from our paycheck. And then when you finally do file your 1040, you look at that and go, wow, I paid a lot more taxes than I thought I did. And I think that would be a real interesting Tea Party experiment if one year we instead had to pay all our taxes in one lump sum. And so I think most people don't realize how much they pay in taxes right now.
Yeah, California probably has to wait till September before they hit tax freedom day.
I almost said that.
Yes, and when I had Dan Pilla on last week, we talked about this because so many people are pleased when April 15 comes around, or because they get a tax refund. And the point is they've been overpaying their taxes over the year before, and so they get some money back, and they feel like the government somehow or the other helping them out. No, you've given the government an interest-free loan for a year. Try getting an interest-free loan from the government for a year. But that goes on. So Dan would recommend people try to assess about how much they're going to owe in taxes and have that taken out early. But the other side of the thing is, it would be nice. I would argue that what I'd like to see us do is have the money set aside in what we might call our tax account, so that, like an IRA, for lack of a better term, the money set aside for the government. We can't have access to it till the previous year, to the year end ends, and then we write a check out when we get that tax bill so that we know how much we're actually spending. We actually have to write a check out to the government or use our credit card, but set the money aside in something that belongs to us rather than the government holding on to it. Maybe we can even make a little interest on it, but force us to have to pay that so that we realize how much money is coming out for federal taxes. Now, federal income tax is a huge part of it. There's been some discussion that, wouldn't these tariffs offset what we pay in income taxes? Well, the tariff revenue that we get, and this has been true for decades, is about 2% of total federal revenue. It's roughly $70 billion or so coming in from tariffs right now. Now, even if you had the new tariffs coming in and we made a lot more, $6 trillion that Peter Navarro is suggesting we might pull over 10 years, that was our spending in 1 year. So even though he's suggesting that tariffs could bring in as much as $6 trillion in 10 years, that's that's actually more than the federal budget, the federal government receives, but that's about how much we've been spending in a year.
Kelly, I wanted to come to you for just a minute because you always talk about regulations, because there's another one. We just talked about Tax Freedom Day, but there's another one. It's called the Cost of Government Day. And that's where they take not only the taxes, but they also try as best as possible to figure out the cost of regulations, federal, state, and local. And that number is a little more imprecise, but sometime in July. But that puts it in perspective that if you talk about the cost of taxes and regulations, you work more than half the year to finally get the government off your back to begin to earn a living for you and your family. And I think that just illustrates, again, one of the reasons why when Donald Trump came in, he wanted to reduce the number of regulations just in the federal government alone.
Yeah, I feel like in his first term, in addition to his Supreme Court appointments, probably the thing that had the greatest impact was his reduction of regulations. He had that goal of, for every new regulation on business, they were going to drop 12, and they did that. And I assume they're doing that right now again. And boy, nothing will make the economy grow, I think, as much as that. When you take all these regulations off of small businesses and let them really flourish, that makes a huge impact. And, one of the things you mentioned earlier, Kerby, that we haven't talked about today, but I think one of the things that would really free up a lot of time that should not be spent and allow people to be much more productive is to not have an income tax. If instead we had something like, the fair tax, some sort of property tax, some sort of tax that we pay, sales tax, then nobody has to study all this stuff and figure out and how to put their money in this or that and go through all the tax season. And you just think of the whole IRS, not needing most of it. Think of all the people that have to hire people, all the businesses that have to hire people, all the time that is spent. If that was used on productive work, that would be a huge boost for the country. And again, I think the fair tax concept is a good one in that, because the complaint is always that, well, if you just do sales taxes, the lower income people will really get hammered because it's a large percentage of what they have. But the way the fair tax worked is you get all that money back up to the amount of poverty. So you really don't have those taxes starting until after the poverty level. But man, and I so love the idea of, people getting to decide whether they pay the tax. Mm-hmm. If you don't want to pay the tax, then don't buy it. But if you do, you pay the tax, you see it, like we're talking about now. It's not hidden where you're not sure how much you're paying. Every time you pay, you see it in your bill. I just think that would be so good for our economy if we were to ever move in that direction.
Kirby, we live in Texas, and we don't have a state income tax here. We're one of the 7 or 8 states that don't have a state income tax, and so we never have to fill out a state income tax. I love that. So if we could, the fair tax wants to try to include Social Security and Medicare in there because those are such big programs. It makes the amount you'd have to charge significantly higher. So I would say start out with a federal income tax that excludes Medicare and Social Security. Because we have a payroll tax that covers most of that. But that way you get a little lower, because if the sales tax is 30 or 40%, people start pushing back and finding ways. But if the sales tax were national sales tax 15% or something, then you add the state sales tax on that for states that have it. It might be very workable, and we could get away from this federal income tax. What a great day that would be.
And no tax fraud either, right? The people that are cheating on their taxes right now, it wouldn't work. You got to pay it when you buy whatever you're buying.
We can't cheat on our state income tax because we don't have one.
Let me just mention that on Wednesday, Dr. Matthews had Sterling Burnett on, and I've quoted him many times. And of course, you had him on talking about EPA, but he also brings a lot on tax policy. And certainly your other guest, Barbara Colm, is, of course, with the Austrian Economic Center. So if you are thinking about this, of course, I know Dr. Matthews, if people type your name, they will find times in which you've written about the flat tax, the fair tax, and a variety of others. But it does seem to me that time may be coming, and as creative as this administration wants to be with trying to figure out how to fund the government with tariffs and all sorts of other things, there are certainly maybe the possibility of coming to something that we've been talking about for a long period of time. So enough on economics. When we come back, just thought this would be kind of interesting. Dr. Matthews and I traded stories about the reaction from some of the fans of Luigi Mangione. Now, again, we'll get into that whole issue, but that is, I think, a statement about something wrong in our society. So we thought we'd talk about that for just a minute. And I might just mention upcoming also is the commentary by Penna Dexter on public broadcasting. So we have a lot more to cover. We'll take a break, be back with more right after this.
In 19th century London, 2 towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, broadcasting live from WPEO in Peoria, Illinois, and looking forward to some other opportunities to work with some of the other radio stations celebrating their time of broadcasting. Just as a program note, let me just mention we have Robert George next week. Looking forward to that conversation about Truth Matters. Doug Grotice will be with us. We'll be talking about apologetics. Tom Hobson. And then a little bit later, I know we have John Kasich. So just a number of people that you will want to hear here on Point of View. So lots of great things coming up in the future. But Dr. Merrill Matthews, let me come to you for just a minute because you suggested this piece, and it is, I'll just warn our listeners right now, one where you will just shake your head, you'll roll your eyes, but Luciano Mangione is now being hailed as a saint, the patron saint of healthcare access for all. If you're not familiar, here is the individual who is engaged in, I'll quote Pam Bondi, Attorney General, a premeditated, cold-blooded assassination of a United Healthcare executive, Brian Thompson. And if nothing else illustrates what is wrong with our country, Merrill Matthews, what is going on?
Well, marketing for one thing, you can buy, and I'm reading from the journal piece on this, devotional candles bearing Mr. Mangione's image and a, quote, prayer of Saint Luigi on the back, a St. Luigi Sherpa fleece blanket for $69.99, a coffee mug for $12, a necklace for $45, a, quote, patron saint of capitalism's victims T-shirt, or a Luigi Mangione, our patron saint of healthcare T-shirt for $16.99. And they have set up what's called a Give, Send, Go. That's a Christian crowdfunding site. They've raised $836,000 for his legal defense, $836,000. And then it also mentions in here more than 40% of Americans age 18 to 29 think the shooting of the healthcare CEO was acceptable or somewhat acceptable, according to a December 17 Emerson poll. Kerby, this is just, I shake my head at this.
And I just want to broaden it because, Kelly, I want to get your comments because they're also finding that a fair number of people on the left think that the person that tried to assassinate Donald Trump in Butler, Pennsylvania, shouldn't have missed. I mean, we have a problem, and I think these stories, but I'll just use Luigi Mangione for the moment as an illustration of something has gone wrong in this country.
Yeah, I was literally, I didn't know you were going to go to the second part of that, Kerby, and I was thinking the exact same thing. They just had the poll that came out this week, and it was basically 50% of Democrats thought it would be justifiable to kill President Trump. And so I think both of these things, I mean, the thing that's really weird about the Luigi Mangione is the trying to put some sort of Christianity about it, about murder.
A patron saint.
Yeah. I mean, but I think that, what happens to a culture that, celebrates death and abortion and, you start to lose respect for life. You do that at the beginning with abortion. You do it at the end with euthanasia. And you start to coarsen your culture. And so I would surmise that of the 50% that think that, and they also, it wasn't just Trump. They had it was close to 50%, like 48% for Elon Musk. It was justifiable, to kill him. And I think that most of these people don't know the Lord. But the thing scary about what Merrill Matthews brought up is those people are talking about the Lord. Those people really need some theology training. They need to read the Bible maybe once or something.
A Christian self-funding site raising $836,000. That's not. Hey.
That is just. It's crazy. But that's what happens when you don't have, when you don't have the Lord's standards, then you have whatever standard feels right. And so if you don't like somebody, then I think it's justifiable if they get knocked off. And that's where you go. And so we're just seeing a culture that has moved away from the Lord. Now, one of the encouraging things on the other side is how we're seeing this rising up of our younger people at all the universities around the country. the huge sort of revival-like things going on, Asbury and all that, but Auburn and Arkansas, and I mean, you name the university, we've seen the pictures. Yes. And then you've got some of these studies that have come out in the last 3 or 4 months. For the first time in the history of the country, more young men going to church than even young women. Now, part of that is the negative part. The young women are becoming, more alienated or whatever by the church. They've been caught into this movement that's going on. But I think still the major part of that is the young men going back to church, the young men increasing. And, of course, that will lead to huge changes in the future. So we see the message of those who don't know the Lord and certainly don't know Scripture on the other side of the coin, I do think we see something coming from the younger generation that is highly encouraging.
One of the things that I guess we could say, if I can borrow Charles Dickens for a minute, Tale of Two Cities, the best of times, the worst of times, because another positive we can talk about, Kelly, is Bible sales are up and Christian book sales are up. So you really you used to have kind of this middle mass of middle America, good values, and what you now have is a real schism between old and young, rich and poor, faithful and religious and non-religious. One of the growing statistics, sadly, is for those that are unaffiliated, sometimes referred to as the nuns. And so in some respects, that's what you're seeing unfolding. So at a time when we can talk about some of the positive things, and one of the things I'm hearing as I'm traveling around here, people really do appreciate hearing the positive stories. Hearing Kelly, for example, talk about having 9 cases before the Supreme Court and winning all 9, the most recent one unanimously, hearing about the resurgence in faith and that. And at the same time, we're hearing about demented fans that are buying some of these religious artifacts, Dr. Matthews, that you just thought maybe were somebody making it up on the Babylon Bee, but unfortunately it really is happening.
And, they're talking about St. Luigi of healthcare access for all. Well, the head of United Healthcare, the one he assassinated, they provided health insurance for millions of Americans. It was the largest health insurance company in the world. So their criticism is that they would maybe deny some people, but very few things are actually denied. So it's a strange thing where somebody who runs a company that provides access to health insurance for millions of Americans, including seniors, is killed because he denies access when in fact they're empowering access to so many millions.
Kelly, it reminds me of the fact that we were talking about this before, and I think we talked with Merrill Matthews as well. Elon Musk owns 12.8% of Tesla, which, if you want to do the math, suggests then that 80%, basically 88% of almost of the amount is actually invested in your 401k or your IRA. So when you're trying to destroy Tesla, you're not going to affect Elon Musk. You're going to affect all the people who have these investments. The same thing here. If indeed you think that I want to take out an individual that is really harming health care in America, they are the very ones that were actually providing health care for America. So the lack of logic in any of this makes no sense, does it?
No, it doesn't. It's really crazy, what's going on. And that division is really true. Now, the other good side to that is there are all these people this is the reason I think we're seeing this movement. I think in America it was maybe 22% increase in Bibles, but overseas it's even greater. Mm-hmm. And I think this division is creating, if you're on the dark side, you don't know the Lord, you don't have Scripture, you're searching. You're searching for something with meaning because you know where you are is not the answer. So there's a real opportunity when you have such it's harder when things meld from one side to the other and you can't really tell, where people stand or what you believe or what, it's a little easier when the division is a little more stark to present the options. And so it's a great chance, for people who really are searching. And, It's one of those things you hear at church all the time. It's like, what was it? I don't remember the last percentage. I just remember it being very high. It was either 70 or 80 or maybe even 90% of people said that they would go to church if they were asked.
Mm-hmm.
And so just simple things like asking a neighbor or asking somebody if they want to go to church. That can be a start of a whole change of life for them because so many people are looking for something.
And, you know, Kerby, the direct parallel with the assassination of Brian Thompson is people who have been going out and attacking Tesla cars and trucks. I mean, they've been scraping them, blowing them up, setting them on fire. It's amazing.
Well, again, I think the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is going to have something to say about that. And so we'll come back and talk about the Viewpoints commentary by Penna Dexter, Defund Public Broadcasting, and we'll wind down for today. But a good time to invite people to Palm Sunday and to Easter. We'll be right back.
President Trump recently told reporters he would be honored to defund National Public Radio and the Public Broadcasting Service. He said they are a waste of money. Both PBS and NPR have long exhibited a decidedly liberal political bias and, more recently, have advanced far-left positions on issues like gender ideology. Currently, PBS and NPR receive approximately $500 million per year in federal funding through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting is a private, nonprofit organization authorized by Congress in 1967 when there were 3 network television choices. Today, there are hundreds of channels, plus, as Washington Post columnist George Will points out, 15,000 commercial radio stations, 425 U.S. satellite radio channels, and over 4 million registered podcasts worldwide. The heads of PBS and NPR testified at a recent House Oversight Committee hearing. PBS President Paula Kerger told the committee, "We bring a diversity of viewpoints." But CEO Catherine Marr conceded in her testimony that NPR botched coverage of Hunter Biden's infamous laptop. House members also pointed out that the network misinformed the public on COVID-19 origins and the Russian collusion hoax. According to Victoria Taft at PJ Media, 87 out of 87 editors at NPR are leftist Democrats. Why are we funding them? If we stopped, she writes, PBS stations won't be destitute. They fundraise through telethons and on-air messages. They receive funds from leftist organizations like the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has called for removing all taxpayer funding of both PBS and NPR. At the House hearing, she told their leaders, "We believe that you all can hate us on your own dime." Conservatives in Congress often advocate defunding these entities, but many legislators fear local pushback. If they can't summon the courage, DOJ can help them. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, let's, we can talk about the commentary that we oftentimes play on Friday, our weekend edition at this particular time, both in the first hour and the second hour. Penna Dexter's piece by Defund Public Broadcasting. And I'll come to Kelly for just a minute, but I just thought I might just mention that she talks about the fact that PBS and NPR receive a fair amount of federal funding through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And maybe that was a good idea decades ago, but certainly this is an organization station and a broadcasting service that has become decidedly more liberal, and that was illustrated by even the testimony of the CEO, Catherine Mayer, who conceded that they botched the coverage of Hunter Biden's laptop, but then was interviewed by members of Congress about some of the statements that she had made there as well. So, Kelly, it does seem to me that if we're talking about DOGE, we're talking about government efficiency, we're trying to scale back the size and scope of the federal government, maybe one very good place to cut would be something that was established back in the days of Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah, I think most Americans realize this is a really bad idea, especially after the testimony. It's being used as a propaganda, the government propaganda for one side of the political aisle. It's a horrible idea. Now, certainly having some sort of message or program in other countries that is pro-America, that's one thing. That's not what this is, and this is a really bad idea. The idea that you forcibly have taxpayers paying for clearly partisan, kind of one-sided, quote news on the air. I mean, it's just wrong. It's wrong in every way. It's wrong politically. It's wrong morally. It's just a horrible idea, and it needs to stop.
You know, Kirby, about a year ago, so maybe a little longer, Yuri Berliner, who had been a longtime producer at NPR, wrote a piece and explained how things had changed there in his time. And of course, I used to do commentaries for NPR's All Things Considered in the late '90s, early 2000s, and it was a liberal leaning organization then, but I thought they were they're very fair to me, and I'm doing conservative commentaries and so forth. But it began to change over time, and especially when Donald Trump came in 2017, you could just see the coverage begin to change in ways that, and we all know this, if you're a reporter and you want to skew the message, you go to certain people who have a skewed view of it, and you cite them as people who are experts in this, and that's how you make sure you reinforce your point. NPR gets about 8% of its funding from the federal government. That's, I think, can probably be made up fairly easily. I don't know if PBS gets the same amount there, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and the television, but certainly the NPR, at least as I see the PBS, you can take PBS. Most of what I see on there is not, I mean, it's Masterpiece Theater and things. Right. I love those things. Sure. We watch it on Sunday evening. But certainly NPR is all-day news. It's still, all things considered, in Morning Edition, still the best long-format news, but it is clearly liberal and probably should not be funded by the taxpayers.
Well, again, just thought that we would put that on the table. And again, if you would like to read Penn and Dexter's commentary, it is available on the website, pointofview.net. Mine today is on corporate wokeness and about the fact that we see that Walmart and others that are now maybe backing away from this issue of DEI, and that relates very well to some of the conversation that we've had today about the fact that if you go to our website, pointofview.net, we have a take action item there in which you can contact your member of Congress about the Dismantle DEI Act, which is there as well. But Dr. Matthews, for just a minute, one of the things we mentioned the other day was about whether or not we're bringing these dire wolves back from extinction. And a good friend Wesley J. Smith said, I think this is a little bit too much of a hype. Yes, they did, the company, make 20 gene edits, but we aren't quite to the point where we can say that we've brought an animal back from extinction. And I think we're still a little bit further away from Jurassic Park.
We're not at Jurassic Park yet. Yeah, no, they took wolf genes and they made some adjustments to them using DNA from the dire wolf from what they say was 10,000 years ago. And what it looks like is a white wolf. They could have painted it. But
so again, it's and as a matter of fact, some of those genes had to do with fur color. So again, we talked about that the other day, but I just wanted to hasten people to not think that we're anywhere close to Jurassic Park, are we?
No, but I have to say the little wolf pups are really cute. They are really cute.
Yeah, I think the main learning from all this is playing God is very dangerous. I would not advise it.
Well, just before we run out of time, Kelly, I always like to talk about prayer requests, and I would have to say that one of the things I am starting to run into is just as people really got excited about Coach Kennedy, because I think everybody had a favorite coach, there are a lot of people that are starting to tell me they're very upset about a woman that has served as a teacher for 30 years and then lost her job over a crucifix that isn't any bigger than about 6 inches. What's going on with that?
Yeah, the Marisol Castro case is really exploding. We actually, we've been doing cases for a long time, and we've gotten more, readership, response, or whatever from this case than any other case except for the Seals case. I mean, it's amazing, right? So Marisol, 30 years, a teacher, and just loves her kids. And what happened is you could go through the school. Every teacher behind their desk on the wall has personal workspace where they can put whatever they want up there. They have you name it, it's up there, right? Star Wars figures. You could put a pride flag up. You could do whatever you want. Well, she had a lot of things, but one of the things was a cross. And they told her to take it down. In fact, they told her, well, it would be okay if you hung it under your desk. And so the union kind of forced her, and so she hung it under a desk, and she was so convicted by that, and you could see the video. We interviewed her about this, that she refers to the Father as Papa God, and she apologized to Papa. She said, this was wrong, and I will never do this again. She brought the cross back, put it along with all the other things she had, and they're now proceeding to, they walked her out of the school like a criminal, and they're persecuting her, all in violation of law. Now, what's the argument? Well, students are students nearby. They might see the cross. Now, gosh, I could swear we had a Supreme Court case where there was maybe somebody like a coach or somebody praying, and they said, hey, the kids are going to see the coach praying. And the Supreme Court said, so what? And they ruled, you can't restrict the coach from praying. That violates free speech. That violates free exercise of religion. Exactly Marisol's case. But they're refusing to back down. In fact, they're persecuting her. We've got one of the largest law firms in the world has joined us on behalf of Marisol, and we're going to do everything we can, not only to win for Marisol, but to set a precedent that really protects every teacher out there. They don't have to be ashamed of their faith. They're allowed to be who they are.
So, again, that's a prayer target. Of course, sign up for our Prayer for America, because we send out some prayer targets each week. And, of course, Kelly has those there as well. We're just about out of time. First of all, I want to thank both of you guys. Kelly and Merrill, thank you for being with us. I also want to thank, of course, Megan and Karen back at the studio, and then in with me today, Steve. So we've had quite an opportunity to put together a rather unique Friday weekend edition where people are in 2 different locations at the same time. But, again, I want to thank those at WPEO. They've been such gracious hosts. We're going to be speaking tomorrow night and looking forward to that. And we're back on Monday. And as you heard, we've got a lot of great topics that we'll be addressing next week. So again, thank you for listening to Point of View. Enjoy the weekend. We'll look forward to seeing you back here on Monday, right here on Point of View.
At Point of View, we believe there is power in prayer. And that is why we have relaunched our Pray for America campaign, a series of weekly emails to unite Americans in prayer for our nation. Imagine if hundreds of thousands of Americans started praying intentionally together on a weekly basis. You can help make that a reality by subscribing to our Pray for America emails. Just go to pointofview.net and click on the Pray for America banner that's right there on the homepage. Each week you'll receive a brief news update, a specific prayer guide, and a free resource to equip you in further action. We encourage you to not only pray with us each week, but to share these prayers and the resources with others in your life. Join the movement today. Visit pointofview.net and click on the banner Pray for America right there at the top. That's pointofview.net. Let's pray together for for God to make a difference in our land. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.